Well, it's a very good Monday morning, and thank you for joining us once again. My name is Fred KUMAKYA, and we're here to make sense of the political and the economic situation that is happening in this country. On the 14th, which was last Thursday, Uganda has made a decision to go and choose for two important positions. The first position was the position of the presidency, and then the other position was the representation for the different members of parliament that comes across. I'll ask my producer, before we drive ourselves into this very important discussion, probably to give us the results of what Justice Simon Byabakama declared. That was in the eve of Saturday. And President Yoweri Kaguta, I'll ask my producer if you could give me those results, probably to start from that. My guest this morning is Professor Ndebesa Mwangusha. He's a political analyst. He's an economic analyst from Makerere University. He's here to share with us his perspective on how he looks at things. One of the things that makes us different in life is basically how we look at things. Maybe how we look at things is totally different from the way he looks at them. So he's here to share with us on his perspective on how he looks at things. Given the circumstances we voted from, was the ground leveled for the different candidates? That and most ends our discussion. But President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni emerged with 58.64% in the presidential race, which was declared on Saturday evening. Robert Sentamu Kyagulanyi, the president for National Unity Platform, emerged with 34.83%. Patrick Oboya Amuriat, the presidential candidate for Forum for Democratic Change, emerged with 3.24%. And then we have the DP president, Honorable Norbert Mao, with 0.56%. And then other than Mao, yes, that was Mao. Then Mr. General Henry Tumukunde emerged with 0.50%. He was an independent candidate. General Gregory Mugisha Muntu, the president for Alliance for National Transformation, emerged with 0.65%. The only lady, Kalembe Nancy, she was an independent candidate with 0.38%. Katumba, I beg your pardon, with 0.36%. He was also an independent candidate, and that was also Mwesige. He was also an independent candidate with 0.25%. And then Kableta, he was also an independent candidate with 0.44%. We are here with Professor Ndebesa. He's a political economist, to give us his perspective on how he looks at things. After the declaration, Kyagulanyi is still under house arrest. NOP intends to go to court. NRM is jubilating, but at the same time recommends those that feel were dissatisfied with the results to probably present what they have. Professor, it's a pleasure and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for hosting me too. My general comment, first of all, let me point out an issue that has not been specifically discussed in the media, which bears on the results of this election. Namely, the turn-up. When the exercise started on Thursday, all commentators were talking about massive turn-up. And if you drove around in Kampala...
Maybe those without analysis said so.
No, but they were looking at people. Before you analyze, you first observe. The general observation was that there was a massive turn-up. But when the Electoral Commission declared the results, it is almost 50% turn-up. That's a very low turn-up.
Okay.
And it's one of the lowest since we started these elections. So it is rather confusing that casual observation, there is a higher turn-up, but the results declared, it is very low. In the context of Uganda, that was very low, because in the past we would have 70%, 60%, but now 50%. And this is against the backdrop that even some results which tended to give outcomes by turn-up, there were those who were saying in some places in southwestern Uganda, in some places, the turn-up was 100%.
In some places,
or was 80% or 90%. That would imply that in some regions it is less than 50% or even 40%.
Okay.
If you look at overall picture. So what is it that we are not getting in the politics of this turn-up? That in one place, overall, we observe that there is a high turn-up. Even the observers, the East African community observers, and I think African community observers or whatever, they said, oh, they congratulated Ugandans for turning up in large numbers to cast their vote. But that's not what Byabakama is giving us. What is giving us a grim picture that more than 7 million Ugandans
stand up.
Of Ugandans did not turn up, actually. Because the number is supposed to be 18 million, but about 10 million turned up. That's just above 50%. I think that gives a grim picture. But relatedly, something I wanted to point out also is that we need to always probe this question of turn-up also. Why in some regions there is higher turn-up and in other regions there is no higher turn-up?
Should the discussion be based on regional turn-up or the entire...
We should have that breakdown of regional turn-up or district turn-up and then the national turn-up and the observation versus what is declared.
Okay.
But again, you have to find out whether actually the turn-up that is talked about, even the turn-up that is supposedly turned up, whether they really turned up. Because
that's another fundamental question.
That's a fundamental question because in the regions or reporting centers where there were no agents of candidates, or where the agents were compromised, it is said, and I've found out, I've been told from my contacts, that actually in some polling stations, they would simply tick, or people would just vote, and when there is no more queue, people in the queue, you just vote and stop at a certain, you vote for those who didn't turn up anyway. So the trick in the cheating this time
maybe is
more in voting for those who did not turn up because there were no agents of some candidates in those regions. Maybe that needs to be probed.
Maybe, Professor, those that you have talked to, have they presented some of the evidence, maybe in some of the areas?
One of the evidence, if you may be shocked, I myself am a registered voter up country, but for some reason I didn't have time to go there. But I almost suspect 99% that they voted for me. So you can imagine if somebody can fear voting for me, how much more does he vote for ordinary people?
Isn't that a shame that, Professor?
It's a shame, and it has been a trend. Not voting?
Yes.
No. For me, it's not a shame. By the way, even if I was there, I think I do not vote because from the beginning and in my comments, and my conscience tells me that the election should not have taken place. This election should not have taken place. It should have been postponed until COVID-19 comes down. So it is contained.
Is it in order anyway for you to make comments on such results, having not turned up to vote, Professor?
You mean foreigners can't comment? Haven't they commented? Were they participating? So what do you mean? Do I have to participate? And do you think I'm not participating? Isn't this participating?
Maybe
does participating in elections means voting?
Voting is very fundamental, Professor.
Even talking is fundamental. I could shape issues of the day in talking more than voting. But that is not, but even the boycotting consciously is voting. Unless you just boycott quietly. But I have said it even elsewhere, that for me, my conscience does not tell me that you can have an election without campaigns. So without effective campaigns, that is to say, because this was not a campaign, where you tell people, where you say you invite...
It was a virtual campaign, Professor.
Listen. That you invite 200 people. To invite 200 people and you know their addresses, to come and listen to you, it implies they are your people. In other words, they are already converted to you. So you are not doing any conversion at all. It is like, I have likened it before to a crusade, a Christian crusade, where you want to convert people to Christianity, and you go to a public place like Kamocha or Kororo, and it would be curious that you only invite they save this.
The president says you reach out to the few that you know, then it is the few that reach out to the other people.
No, but if you reach out to the few you know, that is not campaigning. That is a campaign plan. That's not a campaign. It's a strategic planning, a political planning meeting.
So in your perspective, Professor, we did not have anything to do with the campaign, in your perspective?
There was no campaign. This one is just something that's similar to a campaign. Because in an effective campaign, there must be freedom to express oneself. There must be a freedom to mobilize people. And by the way, this is also participating people rather than citizens participating. Just leaders come and participate the citizens. Citizens to own the whole process of electioneering exercise, they must look to be active. Actually, they should also contribute funding rather than they being paid. You know, when you...
The people themselves.
Yes, that is why even one of the criticism against aid, that it subverts development, is because you just bring money as if you are bringing development from somewhere without people owning it. So people would just say this is a project of the donors. But that's why the whole aid project has now changed to like giving a certain percentage, like 70%, and the people also contribute 30%, so that they know that they are also participating. So the voters should actually also make a contribution towards the whole electioneering exercise, campaign exercise, even by sacrificing and also making financial contribution, time contribution, going around also mobilizing, attending rallies. Now, in the absence of those, this is not a typical campaign exercise that meets the democratic principles of a fair, free, and legitimate elections.
What are these democratic principles that you are talking about, Professor?
The basic principle
that you think lacked in this, the one you called nota.
The basic principle of democracy is participation. That's why democracy is about the people. So the people should not be participated, that you simply invite them, they do not participate in the exercise, they do not contribute even funding, they hardly even contribute to the manifesto. You have heard how the manifesto is made. There is a manifesto committee that meets every day, every week, and then comes up with some final project which was not owned by the people in terms of getting their views. So participation is cardinal, but also law and the principle of rule of law. But so there was no rule of law.
But that was the case. The case of campaign, general campaign, was the norm previously. But given the circumstances of COVID-19, we are what we are now because of the circumstances that have come as a result of
we could have waited,
the COVID-19 pandemic.
We could have waited. The world was not going to end when we wouldn't have an election. There are some countries that have postponed elections. Having this election under COVID-19, even we are a least developed country. I hope you know that we are a narrow DC, a least developed country. We are not yet in the middle income status. And to go in an election which is very expensive.
But development is a process, Professor.
So what?
So for us to get there, it's a process. It's not an event.
So you plan it. You plan, among the plans was not to spend money freely.
Maybe that's what
in an election exercise. In an election exercise, when our economy and our finances are strained, was also very, 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 very negative, because the consequence of this is going to be felt down to the population and the country at large. This economy is going to go into a high recession, of course, of COVID, but also exacerbated by participating in an election under COVID-19. We have been spending trillions in this election exercise, and at the same time during election exercise, investments do not take place. Some people actually went away, some investors went away, some industries actually halted until this election exercise is over, and we had just emerged from the specter of COVID-19 lockdown. Then you added on lockdown because of elections, and in a narrow DC, a least developed country, we cannot afford to do that.
You seem to be suggesting that we spent outside our budget.
Of course.
I want to think we spent depending on how we planned this election.
Actually, 3 months into the budget, which started in July. in October, there was a supplementary budget to State House to the tune of 517 billion. How do you spend a supplementary? Supplementary means it is money given to you when you have exhausted the one you had been budgeted for.
And it comes into help.
So you budget, how do you budget for a department or a ministry 3 months into the budget?
But you
are
also
already asking for supplementary.
You also know why supplementaries come on board.
I don't know. Actually, you tell me if you know. Tell me.
Maybe when there are gaps in one or the other.
Tell me, which gap?
Gaps in terms of economy.
Which gap was
in terms
there?
Of spending,
which gap was there? Which gap was there 3 months into the budget? Tell me if you know.
Maybe the experts, if the experts were here, they would
explain. Now, the fact that you are lost, it means that the expenditure on that supplementary budget was not clear. And after all, those are the budgets which are normally called classified. So they were just for elections anyway, to put it bluntly. It was money for elections. So I don't think Uganda was capable, was in a position to hold an election after the lockdown of COVID-19. We are going to have a serious economic recession. We are already a poor country. Many people don't know that Uganda is a poor country. What saves us is that we have food.
Maybe
because of the good climate. Because of good climate and good soils, we are somehow food sufficient. Otherwise, you wanted to say what is the measurement of poverty?
Yes.
There are very many measurements, but let's use the general measurement in a comparative manner with East Africa. Uganda's GDP is 30 billion US dollars. That is Uganda's GDP. Compare it with the annual returns of Facebook, which is about 700 billion US dollars. Compare it with Kenya, which is now about 100 US dollars. Compare it with Tanzania, which is about 70 US dollars. Kenya is a middle income country. It is almost going to the upper middle income. If it was not for COVID by now, maybe it would be upper middle income. Tanzania is, since April, entered into the middle income status. But Uganda is far from getting into the middle income status because its GDP per capita is around $800. And that one, by the way, even Rwanda, Rwanda's economy, of course, is smaller than Uganda, considering that the country is small, both in size and population, but its GDP per capita, that is when you divide their total GDP with the population, its GDP per capita is slightly above that of Uganda. So you can imagine Uganda is behind Kenya, behind Tanzania, behind Rwanda in terms of GDP per capita. And we may say that it is because we have had wars here and there, but Rwanda emerged out of a war just about 20 years ago. But its GDP per capita is higher than that of Uganda. So you can see that Uganda's economy is very poor. When you look at our export earnings, they are far below our import bill. We have got a very big trade deficit with us, and we are highly indebted, even after our debts by the multilateral donors had been cancelled. So by and large, the picture you get in Uganda is of a poor country anyway, even the statistics show it, and therefore to embark on a very expensive exercise like elections after we had emerged out of the COVID lockdown was to be reckless in planning, to say the least.
So given that precedence, where does it point us to? Given the background that you seem to be suggesting that we are a poor country, we come from this kind of background. So given that precedent in terms of the economy, where does it point us to?
Well, I had already told you that our economic growth is projected at around 3%. That is overall, in terms of overall growth rates. But you can see that that's not something to talk home about, considering that we are emerging from the bottom. We are not yet somewhere. Because some countries could be growing at 3% and they are doing very well, depending on where they started from. For us, we need to be growing at, say, maybe 11% per annum. But 3%, and this is lower than we have been, which was an average of about 5-6%. But that is overall sectors. But when you look at the sector, for example, agriculture, it has not been doing very well, and yet the backbone, not the backbone of the economy. By the way, when people talk about the backbone of the economy, sometimes I don't understand. So you say agriculture is the backbone of the economy. No.
What is the backbone of the economy? That is what
it depends how we can define it. No, I have not taught you that. And I have not taught it to anybody. That's not true. Whereas almost more than 70% of the population in Uganda is employed in agriculture. Agriculture contributes only 22% to GDP. Only 22% to GDP. And contributes about 1%, actually less than 1% to revenue collections in this country.
Okay.
So the biggest sector of our economy is services, which contributes more than 50%. Industry is about 17-20%. The biggest sector in Uganda is the services sector, and that is where even most of the revenue collection comes from. Yes, agriculture contributes a lot in terms of employment and in terms of feeding the country, but in terms of overall picture of economic development projections, agriculture contributes only 22%, and yet even its growth rate has been growing by declining. What I mean is that the economic, for about 10 years, the agriculture economic growth has been slowing down. Not that there has not been growth, but the growth rate has been slowing down from 7% to 5% to 4% to 3%. So that is not a good picture. But that is in terms of agricultural production even. When you look at the picture of agricultural productivity, some people out there mistake agricultural production with agricultural productivity. Agricultural production is the volume that you have produced from whatever
period of time.
Not only period, but also, like say, acreage. But productivity would be to find out how much is produced on 1 acre over a period of time. If with this year you have 10 acres and you produce 40 tons of whatever the case may be, and the next year you produce 60 tons, you will have increased in terms of agricultural production if you also have increased on the acreage that you have planted. But you could still have 40 acres. This year you produce 60 tons. The following year in the same 40 acres, you produce 80 tons. That means agricultural productivity has increased.
Okay.
Because of agricultural husbandry, maybe use of fertilizers, maybe controlling weeds, and etc. etc. Now, in terms of Uganda, you ask all economists, they will tell you, agricultural productivity in Uganda has been declining badly, to the extent that in some crops, agricultural productivity decline is about 40%. In other words, a production per hectare, or production if it is animals per cow, or any other sector in terms of the acreage or the volume or the unit in which you are producing. Meaning that we are having, for example, that means we are suffering from soil erosion, soil depletion, soil erosion, maybe diseases affecting our productivity. So our productivity in Uganda is very, very alarming. Agricultural productivity, that is, I'm talking about. But even if we talked about labor productivity, you can go and look at figures. Some figures were so alarming that Kenyans are 3 or 5 times more hardworking than Ugandans. So when you consider labor productivity in Uganda, it is also very low.
I think the fundamental questions would be, what are the leading cause of such factors? Maybe we can touch that later on. Professor, there are a few other things that stood very fundamental. For the first time, we see internet off. The spokesperson of government, Ms. Ofono Pondo, had promised that today, Monday, by exactly 9 or 10, the internet will be off. Maybe what's your perspective on the internet being off since Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday? Today is a Monday, and we haven't yet gone back to the normal business.
I don't know. I haven't put on internet or social media since morning. It is now, I think, 10. but it hasn't returned.
It hasn't returned.
They may not return it for some time, but I think that was a security measure. So they looked at the security measure and it took precedence over everything else.
Was it a wise decision?
Well, it depends on which perspective. If we don't know much of the security dimension of that internet and the social media, but when you look at it from the angle of democracy, definitely it was not a wise decision, because it is one of the factors that has thwarted democratic processes, because it will even raise concerns. For example, the Electoral Commission told the general public and the world at large that for them, they have their own secret system in which they were receiving results and tallying them, which is not known to everybody.
Okay.
And yet,
of course, which must
according
not
to
be
law, no, it is supposed to be known by everybody. Because even according to law,
system?
No. The tallying and the transmission of results.
Okay.
Because even according to law, the results were supposed to be transmitted through email, and the different political players, candidates and parties were supposed to receive email of the tallying process. But they never received any of the above, and therefore there is it can raise a question even if they didn't do anything.
Maybe they received the results on paper, given the circumstances we operated.
No, you can't have received it on the paper within less than 48 hours. There was transmission electronically, but they had their own system. Maybe they had a satellite that we had no access to, but that also leaves a challenge to the integrity of the election process, because that one can be a ground for those who contest the elections to say the election was rigged, considering that we are now not clear about what I pointed out from the beginning about the perception, the general perception that there was massive turn-up, and yet
the results
show that it was about 50%, which is a contradiction in terms. I even heard the president saying, "Oh, thank you for turning up massively," but this is not massive when you are talking about 50% of the turn-up, and that can start a debate and a question, because after all, the internet was not there. The political parties did not receive the emails as stipulated by the law, and also people had no opportunity to exchange ideas, but also to exchange results, and it left a lot to be desired in terms of democracy process. But the security experts would say that maybe interfering with the internet and the social media maybe was a measure to curb any possible uprising in the country.
Maybe actually
we don't know that.
Some scholars hold
that's technical.
Given the precedence of the previous election, we've had media played maybe a very fundamental role towards some of the mistakes. Maybe it's one of the fundamental reasons. Some scholars reason it that way.
But in the last election, this very last election of 2016, also I think social media was cut off, was shut down. But maybe what I don't remember,
to a small extent,
it seems internet continued, but also those who could access VPN because of internet, they could now at least access those results and those views and those happenings throughout the country. But this time, when they removed the internet completely, even those who could access some information on VPN could not access anything. So we were actually in the darkness. It was an electro darkness this time around, and that leaves questions lingering in the minds of the people and does not augur well with democratic transition.
Does that therefore mean the ground was never leveled to every candidate?
The level was not the ground was not level, not because of the internet per se. It started from the beginning. As I pointed out in some other media, the process of elections starts with appointing the electoral commission.
That's where
if there is no old electoral commission, and that's where the controversy started, and there was no consensus, and people did not believe that the current electoral commission was independent, in spite of the name. Then it is.
But they've never believed so, especially those in opposition.
Yes, they have never believed in so. That is why there is a political there is no political consensus in the country, and there is political polarization in the country, and we have never settled the political question.
But you can also never have all people agreeable to anything.
Consensus doesn't mean quantitatively having 100% people agreeing with each other, but a certain reasonable percentage agreeing and having a consensus with some few dissents. But this time, the dissent gap is so huge that there is no political consensus and there is huge political polarization in Uganda.
Okay.
So we leave the appointment of electoral commission and go to the review and making of the electoral law, which was also generated a lot of debate. It was delayed, I think deliberately, because you cannot be told 5 years. Even the Supreme Court ordered the government in the Amama Mbaba's petition to put in place certain provisions before the next elections. And that is 5 years ago. The government did not do that.
Government had it had
no time.
It had more bills on table maybe to deal with.
It had more bills that were more important than elections. So elections is not important. But I thought that even when the Supreme Court orders government should follow. So it did not. They were delayed. And I had in Parliament there were private members' bills about elections, electoral law. They were ignored until we were stampeded into an election that was also held under COVID-19 after President Museveni, the chief executive, had mentioned some time back at a public conference in May to the effect that holding elections under COVID-19 would be madness. But where the madness came and went, I don't know. But I was talking about making electoral laws. That should be followed by, of course, when you put in place the electoral commission, it does the management. It's supposed to be on top of everything in managing the election.
Which they have.
Which they have, and some others are saying they have not. They were not on top of things because they were partisan and they were not caring as expected. How does somebody during nomination come to your nomination table without shoes and with his coat torn, and then you pretend as if nothing was happening serious? How does somebody get beaten just at your gate in Chambogo and you say you don't know, and later on when the same challenge is thrown to you, you say my TV subscription has expired? That was a bad joke, by the way. I didn't expect it from the chairman of the Electoral Commission. That is playing around with national issues.
Maybe the chairperson came along and tasked the different departments, maybe security and a few other agencies, to do investigations on some of the reasons why things happened the way they did.
He didn't say that. He said for him his TV subscription was expired and therefore he does not look at those things. That was a bad joke. Then we come to the election policing. Everybody knows that the police was partisan. I don't have to...
It's not true to say everybody. It's not true, Professor, to say everybody.
Say to the contrary. If you are not everybody, tell me that the police in this respect and the other was neutral.
No, maybe
in which way was it neutral?
Maybe we would say some.
In which way was police? I'm talking about police as an institution, not individuals.
Maybe my role is not to comment on that, but I am thinking we would say some people say.
Some people say that what? That it was neutral.
It played its role as police.
Yes, the role of being partisan.
Everybody
could see that
the role of defending Ugandans.
Defending Ugandans from what? From COVID-19?
The role of defending Ugandans from some of the...
One of them is COVID-19. Yeah? I hope you know that currently the law in place about COVID-19, the health law or the health measure and directives are the directives of the Minister of Health. Are we together? Not necessarily the President. We normally attribute them to the President, but they are of the Minister of Health under the Public Health Act. Are we together?
We are together.
Yes. Did you or did any other people see the Minister of Health herself flouting the guidelines that she put in place in broad daylight when she held a meeting without even a mask and a procession and nothing was done about her.
But you also
ordinarily she should have been retired.
No,
ordinarily,
maybe, Professor, you're looking at retirement.
You mean I didn't look at her?
That is not what I'm saying.
You didn't see her?
My point is simply one. She came out clearly and responded to what the public's, the allegation the public
How did she respond?
She was in the campaign of COVID-19, and maybe by mistake she left the mask aside.
And then had a procession.
I don't think it was a procession. I'm just quoting her words, Professor.
Yes, and I'm telling you, and we got it from the media, that she was actually meeting her campaign agents. And she stood, by the way. Maybe she has passed through, I think. Now she's even more concerned about her votes than the health issues of Uganda. But anyway, you can hold your views, you and her, but the fact is that we could see very many, after elections now, we have seen after elections, people celebrating and meeting and doing all sorts of processions, and the police is not beating them. Is that being partisan or not partisan?
Maybe,
answer me.
Maybe we get back to the subject.
And get me the evidence that they are not partisan. Since elections were announced, have you seen, or your subscription has also expired?
You seem to be pointing questions to the wrong person, Professor. Maybe if police was here, you would have directed those questions.
You are engaging me. Next time you bring me with the police and I tell them to tell me that police subscription for TV decoders has also expired. Haven't they seen people in processions without observing social distance? But even during the elections, in terms of chewing, they may have been having a number of people had masks on, but I never saw social distancing. Actually, people were shoulder to shoulder, unless you didn't get out of this studio to see what was going on. Was that observing social distancing?
Maybe next time I will invite you.
Was there even water?
Maybe with the political officers to maybe respond to a few of those questions.
I was talking about policing of elections. After policing elections, you have the campaigns also, where you just said from the middle of nowhere, and you say in certain districts or towns there won't be campaigns. Why? Because there has been a surge of COVID-19. But during elections, elections.
That's what the experts reported.
Okay.
I am believing in the words of the experts.
Okay, have the experts told
you? Like I may quote you in one of my statements.
Have the experts told you that after declaration of results, COVID disappeared? Didn't you see people celebrating and they were not constrained by police?
Maybe they will come out.
Have you even seen one tear gas canister being thrown at people who are in processions celebrating?
Maybe we wait for a
Maybe COVID-19 disappeared after elections.
It is still in existence.
So how come that people are celebrating and are meeting and are doing all sorts of funny things without the police constraining them? Why? That shows that there is a problem of the policing and the campaigns and the voting, the voting exercise. We are waiting for adjudication, even. Adjudication is the last exercise in case some people petition. We are waiting for adjudication to see whether also that sector, the judiciary, will also not be partisan, or will also not make their ruling based on influence from outside. So when you get the total exercise, which was also marred by irregularities, which was also marred by use of money, when you total up all these things I'm pointing out, you find that this election did not meet the standards of a free, fair, and credible elections.
Maybe we're waiting to see those who think it was not fair for them to present. Justice Simon Byakama said, if you think the process is not regular, the onus is up to you to present the reason as why you think so. Maybe we wait for the other party.
But they presented to him that they are being beaten, and he said my subscription expired. Was that not presenting to him the evidence?
Okay.
Did he want them to carry the dead body in his office so that he can see the evidence?
Okay, we are still making sense of what is happening in the country, beginning from the 4th, when Ugandans made a decision to vote for the two important positions. That's the office of the presidents and the office of the different members of parliament. As we talk right now, some of the presidential candidates are still under house arrest. But the National Unity Platform yesterday vibrantly came out and said they are going to court because they think the results which were declared on Saturday were not the right results. NRM continues to jubilate because they think they unanimously won this vote. Professor, maybe as we intend to probably wind up, so what do we expect? Looking at the politics, where do we see the economy?
You see, the economy and the politics are intertwined. Anybody who watched what was going on in Uganda, or even if one actually just goes on Google.
Unfortunately, we can't Google now.
No, when it comes, no, we are saying even foreigners now, those who want to come and invest in Uganda, and see that those pictures of torturing, of shooting people, of tear gas, that image does not augur well for the economy of Uganda in terms of investors or in terms of tourists to come to such a country. So the country's image was really tarnished by this election. But two, unless there is political certainty and there is political consensus in the country and there is less political polarization in the country, it discourages investment, both foreign and local.
Why being pessimistic that unless?
I think my pessimism is born by the past, the historical analysis. It's not just from nowhere. Because, as I told you earlier on, Uganda's GDP is only $30 billion US. That's not something to take home about or talk home about. But also that we have had political instability in certain characteristics of political activities and political happenings in our history of elections that have not gone away. There was, the first general election was 1958 in Uganda, which was boycotted by Uganda because of political disagreement and there was no consensus. The next was 61, which was marred by actually not only irregularities, but by violence. And so was 62. And so was 80. And since 1996 or 1993, we have had one common factor, violence. And we have not addressed that violence. And that trend does not augur well for nation building, nation integration, and democracy. So that is one characteristic. Another characteristic is constituency gerrymandering.
Okay.
In the past, constituency would be made every other time of elections, and there would be manipulation. Now manipulation has come in form of starting new districts, starting new constituencies, starting new cities, starting this and that.
And you know why cities come on board, Professor?
Why do they come on board?
The government explained for service delivery, for the service to be nearer to the public.
Anyway, the cities have just come, but we have had districts set up on that rationale.
I based on the cities
which
started last year, and some are yet to commence.
The public there who are listening to me, is service delivery in Uganda better than in the past because we have added on more districts. Some people would even tell you that there were more better service delivery during the colonial period, when actually there were about 14 districts in Uganda, the whole of Uganda. So I don't see the multiplication of districts or multiplication of counties and multiplication of cities, how it will bring service delivery when you don't, the resource envelope is still small. And the more you multiply those constituencies and those districts and those cities, you increase administrative expenditure. You are increasing administrative expenditure at the expense of public sector investment, which would bring more of development than having more of those patronage districts, constituencies, and cities in my opinion.
So you see it more as a burden than a blessing to the society.
There is no blessing in multiplication. I'm not saying there shouldn't be increase depending on the increase of population, but it should be proportionate enough, but not done because you want to create more patronage centers. For example, they had even passed, was it 6 or 7 cities? All of a sudden, towards elections, they were put to 10 in no time.
15 altogether.
Now, what is that really? And you multiply constituencies. Now the constituencies in Uganda are said to be, or members of parliament are going to be 500 and something. That is almost the same number as as India, which has got 1.3 billion people. I was told the other time by some researchers, among them this Kahero Sedu, that Uganda now has got more than 2.7 billion elected officials in this country. And you find USA has about 700, in spite of the fact that USA is 340 million, and it is even bigger in size. Let alone, this is not talk about its capacity to pay, because it is a bigger economy. I don't know how many Southern is bigger than Uganda's economy, and yet it does not have the similar number of elected officials. And those elected officials consume a lot of money and a lot of expenditure on them. So we are bloating these electoral areas, districts, counties, mirukas, and whatever, at the expense of public investment for economic development. And that's why we are going to remain marching time in this country. We need a reverse.
It was an unwise decision.
To multiply these districts and constituencies.
Yes, in your perspective, it was an unwise decision.
It was wrong. It doesn't need wisdom. Wisdom is applied knowledge, but that one doesn't even need serious thinking. It is not correct. Curiously enough, the president himself is against multiplication of districts. He says, you people, we don't want to create more this and that tomorrow, but he's the one endorsing the creation of more districts.
But the endorsement begins from somewhere. I think we should be nailing the other parties. The endorsement, before this goes to the president, it begins somewhere. We should be nailing the parliament.
Don't go by that statement or belief, which is wrong, that every time, even if there is popular demand for something, it must be given. Popular demand, if you asked everybody whether he should pay tax or not, people would say, I'm not going to pay the tax.
But Professor, given the context...
So you have to stand your ground. That's why you are a leader.
Given the context of our discussion...
We are not leaderless.
Given the context of the discussion, what we are discussing begins from Parliament. We should first of all nail the members of Parliament, whom actually...
This Parliament of ours is just a rubber stamp. Quite often, they have disagreed with the president on legislation, and when he returns what they have passed and he disagrees with it,
what's your definition?
They go and pass
your
it.
Definition of a rubber stamp.
My definition of a rubber stamp in the context of Uganda is like this. First of all, there is this common belief and saying that Parliament makes laws.
That is what the Constitution.
I want to differ. Parliament approves laws.
That is not
Why?
in the Constitution.
Well, we don't have to go by what is in the Constitution. We go by what is practical. First of all, the president is a legislator himself, since all laws must pass through him. And when he disagrees with them, he returns them, and in most cases, they follow him. But true...
Just a minute. Legislators sit in Parliament.
Yes, and do what?
A president does not sit in Parliament.
Yeah, but finally,
he sits with the executive in a different corner.
The bill must pass through him before it becomes law. He is more important than the whole Parliament combined, because Parliament has not forced him to do something, but he has forced them to reverse what they have agreed upon. But the point I wanted to make is that 95, or if not 90, more than 95% of the bills come from government, from the executive, not from private members' motions in Parliament. 95 of them come from government for the Parliament.
They come to Parliament for approval, for debate. Maybe first of all,
debate and approval.
Before it gets for approval, Professor.
And when they don't approve, either they are called in the caucus and directed what to do, or if not that, and it sails through and it goes to the president, he does not assent. He brings it back, either they conform or it is shelved completely. Once he says no, the other time there was this bill, controversial bill about homosexuality or something like that. And I saw Parliament and the speaker jumping around and it must go. And then it passed through, and somehow the executive asked people to go to court, and then it was quashed, and then the Parliament jumped around and said, we are going to pass it again. And the president said, no, let's go slow. And we have gone slow until further notice. So Parliament of Uganda was captured in 1986. Graphically, the president mentioned it. There was a controversy about expelling the president's office.
Let me finish
this statement. To remove the president's office from parliamentary buildings because it is president's office. And the parliament made a resolution that the president's office should go away so that they can use those places for offices and other things. Parliament, that is to say. And his reaction was, we are going nowhere. Do you know that we captured you in 1986? That was his rhetorical question. We captured you.
The context of his statement is maybe what should make analysis.
You see, the performance of parliament, it depends on its history. The history of Uganda's parliament, which began as far back in 1920s, I think as logical, was that it was fused with the executive and the executive dominated. The governor and his cabinet dominated the parliament up to 1958 when there was a general election. And then I think since 1967, under the UPC government, the executive dominated. But even since NRM came into power, first of all, in the first NRC period, the president was at the same time the speaker. Chigongo was representing him, but the president was a speaker. So let me use an analogy or a difference with UK. UK's parliament, which is a model. See, UK parliament is very strong because of its history. Some time back,
and given its oppression, the dynamics rotating its oppression.
Some time back, there was a controversy between the king, the executive, and parliament in Britain. And actually parliament reacted and they said, we don't want this domination. So there was a disagreement. And you know what parliament did? They got the king and beheaded him. And UK almost became a republic for about 5 years. So until such a time when parliament now invited the executive, invited the king, and accepted to have another king on their terms. Since that time, parliament has reigned supreme in UK because of that history, because it is the one which in a reconstituted parliament invited the executive and even allowed the king to be installed. And since that time, parliament has become supreme. The one of Uganda was captured in its design in the 1920s by the British. Subsequently, it was captured in 1966-67. Subsequently, it was captured when NRM came into power. So, it is still under captivity.
So what did we vote for, Professor?
We voted for form rather than substance. If you get that and the viewers understand the difference between form and substance. You can have form versus substance. So we have voted form. I think this government, current government, even if parliament was not there.
But let's blame the people. It's the masses
that wouldn't mind much.
It's the masses that vote these members of parliament. We should be blaming the masses, not the president.
You see, the masses vote under certain context. We should understand.
No, that's why I'm saying the blame should be put
on them. It is not the masses who decided that we have elections under COVID-19. It is not the masses who know what intricacies go on in making the law. It is not the masses who appointed the Electoral Commission. So the masses actually are an echo. Do you know an echo? That's science.
It's a reflected sound.
A reflected sound. So the masses are actually an echo of the executive. But you can think the contrary. Me, I have given my assessment.
Let's look at the quality. Most of them, the ministers, have been thrown out of office, out of the August House. What explains this from your context as a professor, as an old broom in this country?
I think it is a protest vote against maybe the executive, what it is doing. So and the ministers have nobody to shield them.
You seem to be saying they've not done anything. So
no, don't talk in absolute terms. I don't like talking in absolute terms and say they have done nothing. They have done something. But I think it has not been big enough to convince the voters that what they are doing is the right thing. Among them, maybe it is a question of the other constitutional coup that took place in 2019 about the Tojikwatako. I think people were not happy with the age limit removal.
Are Ugandans that good enough to remember events of 2-3 years in the history.
They remember and they know the challenge is that they don't have opportunities sometimes to express what they feel. But now for the the cabinet members who are weak and they are vulnerable, the peasants can, because they don't have the security forces behind them, they don't have money to throw around to them, and you get the money, they cannot blackmail the peasants, and the peasants react the way they reacted. So I think that was a vote of no confidence, not necessarily in them. I don't think it is ministers per se, but they are looking at the system generally. And I think not only ministers, but I think most of the MPs.
The system went through.
But I think
the NRM government went through. So if
well,
you generalize
I think what went through was President Museveni or candidate Museveni. And you know that the government of Uganda today and the party are fused. So
NRM has 72 in the next parliament, 72% of the representation will be from the National Resistance Movement.
They are even going to go more because most of these workers and other interest groups are going to be NRM. That does not necessarily reflect what the people believe. The getting through is not the same thing as being supported, because you can win the votes without winning the hearts. That's why the two must be distinguished.
To a politician, which one is important?
To the politician, which one? The most important one is that one which determines you are going to office. But to the general public, to the country, it should be winning the heart and having legitimacy. Once you have legitimacy of government, then the implementation of policies is going to be easy. But the problem with Uganda and other similar banana republics in Africa is that lack of state legitimacy or government legitimacy in the eyes of the people. And that's why we have poor policy implementation. Worse still in Uganda. In fact, there is a joke that good policies are made in Uganda, perfected in Kenya, and implemented in Rwanda. We don't have that policy implementation effectiveness because, among other reasons, of lack of state legitimacy.
Do we see, given the members that have gone through, do we see quality or quantity in the 11th parliament?
Even this parliament which has been there was not qualitative.
Maybe we can discuss that.
It is not me saying it alone. Olanya, the deputy speaker, did say that qualitatively, this parliament, meaning this outgoing parliament, it is still on actually, was poorer qualitatively than the parliament in 1962. This is Olanya who sits there and observes what goes on in parliament. Now that this one is going to be a Mandela Stadium parliament even, the quality is going to go.
We can digest that more after a very short commercial break. Smart Kumacha takes a very short commercial break. We will be right back with Professor Mwangusha Ndebesa, political and economic analyst. More of that after this break.
Smart 24.